Hello, welcome to the Data Analytics Colloquium 1 hour series. This time we have Professor Lauren Santoro giving us a speech on social network analysis. Hi, Lauren, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Great, and I really appreciate your joining us and giving us this introduction series. And I think this is a very interesting method. And I encountered, actually, you taught me that a few years ago, and I'm still using it for my research. Now, this time I can have you to give a formal, a more detailed introduction to SNA. And please go ahead, Lauren.
Well, thank you, Carl. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Like Carl said, I am going to give an introduction to social network analysis. And just to introduce myself one more time, my name is Lauren Santoro, and I'm an assistant professor of political science at the University of Texas at Dallas. So we don't have too much time today to go over too much depth about social network analysis. This is a subject of many courses worth. So going to give a broad overview. I'm going to introduce a lot of concepts and not go into depth about a ton of them, but we're going to do the best that we can. So what I'm going to go over today is I have a few objectives. First, I want you to understand what social network analysis is and also why we should use it. So why study social networks in the first place? What's the point? How can it benefit us in our research? I'm going to introduce some basic network concepts. So because the concept of social networks and specifically the focus on interdependence is going to require a new set of concepts, terms, and definitions of terms that you haven't heard before. So I'm going to introduce those, and then I'm going to introduce basic network statistics as well as tools that you can use for network analysis. Again, the key here is introduction, just skimming the surface on a lot of this stuff. And finally, I'm going to end with a discussion on some challenges to inference. Social network analysis is a really cool tool, but there are some methodological challenges that we need to address as well. So that is the plan for today. So first of all, what are networks? So when I say network, what do I mean? Networks are a set of relationships between objects. So the two key words there are objects and relationships. So what are objects? Objects can be people, they can be individuals, they can be organizations, they can be nation states, they can be items found in a Google search, tweets, almost anything, right, can be an object in a network. Okay, so a set of relationship between objects. And the relationships that we're interested in when we're looking at social network analysis is the emphasis on these social relationships. So relationships like friendships, sharing money, sharing of ideas and information, even sharing disease, and right, power, and on and on. So the emphasis here with social network analysis is on the social relationships. So network analysis is used outside of the social world. Brain cells, for example, in engineering with electrical transformers, we are concerned here with the specifically social relationships. And network analysis is simply the analysis of those relationships between objects. So some quick examples. There's a lot of work that's looked at co-sponsorship networks. So of individuals in a Congress or in a parliament, which elected official is co-sponsoring with another elected official. You can think of children's in classrooms as a network, right? A classroom as a network, and in that classroom, ideas, information, maybe even behavior, definitely behavior, right, is shared in between individuals in classrooms. Donor networks, so individuals, if I donate to a political candidate, you can make networks of both the individuals who donate and the individuals who receive donations. Twitter followers are obviously a network. Co-membership in any organization. So in a social club and a terrorist organization, that co-membership in an interest group, for example, is a network. Also, if you're looking between trade or the share of good between countries, that can also be a network. So Again, these are just some examples. There are many others. So why should we study networks? So why is it important to study networks? What are we doing here? So I would argue that we should study networks for at least 3 reasons. So the first is there's a substantive reason. Networks are important in their own right? They're an important substantive phenomenon that we need to understand, right? Obviously, Twitter, Facebook, but even just, networks of nation states, right? Those are interesting in their own right. Theoretically, though, having access to networks, studying networks, may affect an outcome that we care about. So I am particularly interested in voting behavior. And so theoretically, even though most of the literature assumes that voters make a decision in isolation, well, I think, that voters make decisions, and their decisions are interdependent of each other. This question I have and ask in my research is, does access to opposing political viewpoints in a friendship network, does access to different information in your network, does that affect your vote? So then the interdependence of a person's vote choice or candidate choice. And also methodologically, we should care about networks because, network analysis may solve a methodological problem that solves a research problem, So which worker of an organization has access to the most timely information? So those are at least 3 reasons why we should study networks. Mm-hmm. Study of networks causes us to think relationally, and this is different than most of social science. So in social science, we have this methodological individualism. And so for the most part, social science is going to place an emphasis on the individual as the unit of analysis. So individual as unit of analysis. And for some questions, that is perfectly fine and adequate. However, network analysis places emphasis on the relationship or a dyad as the unit of analysis. So we are interested in that connection between objects, that relationship between objects. And so the focus then is on the interdependence between one individual and another individual, or interdependence between nation states. And when I say interdependence, I mean the reality that social entities are mutually dependent on one another. Okay, so this is this mutual dependence that we're interested in when we're using network analysis. And again, this is different than we are used to be thinking, We're used to be thinking as the individual as a unit of analysis. And it's also different than we're used to theorizing. So if you're thinking on the individual level, it's not you, it's me. But then relational thinking causes us to say it's neither you nor me, it's us, What is the outcome, the overall impact of our relationship? And so that is what we're trying to do in network analysis. So that was a brief introduction to what social network analysis is, and now we're going to talk about the important network concepts. And so, because we're interested in interdependence and not this individualism, so we're interested in the relationship and not just the individual, we need a new set of concepts with which to move forward. So let's talk about a few of those concepts. So the most basic concept that you have in social network analysis is the notion of a graph. So social networks can be represented as graphs. And graphs, this is from graph theory. This is from mathematical theory and analysis. Graphs are hugely important, and they're also very useful when you're talking about network analysis. And specifically in the graph, they're made up of nodes, which are the objects, and that are connected by links, which are the relationships. So remember, network analysis is, we're interested in understanding the relationship between objects. Well, the link corresponds to that relationship, and the object, the node corresponds to the object. So I've given a picture here where you can see node is the circle. That's the object. So again, an object can be an individual, it can be an organization, it can be an article, it can be a nation state. And then the tie between them, also called a link, connects one node to another. So this graph is really, it's the most, this is a basic picture of the network, and it's what we're going to build on moving forward. So that's a graph. More about nodes and links. So nodes and links, again, are important part of graphs. A node can also be called an object, a point, a vertex, an individual, or an actor. So there's a lot of, depending on which book you read, which source you're looking at, they will all call a node maybe something different. So those are just synonyms for the same thing. And again, an example of a node would be a person, organization, nation, a city, a word, an article, etc. The link, again, characterizes that relationship. Links are often called ties. So you'll hear me, as we move forward, refer to the link as a tie a lot. So they're called a tie. They're also can be called lines, edges, connection, or a relationship. And they are embodying, the link embodies the type of relationship: marriage, fighting, communication, money, co-membership in an organization, etc. And when you're talking about links or ties, you can have undirected links and a directed link. So I've given you pictures of what I mean by each of those. So in the first undirected link, you see two nodes, A and B, who are connected by a link, but that link isn't, it's not directed, so there's no arrow to it. And this, you see this, an undirected link, when there is assumed symmetry in a relationship. So for example, marriage. If A is married to B, then B must be married to A, There's no, A cannot be, not married to B, They have to be married to each other. There's no, there's no asymmetry here. And so when you see an undirected link, it means that there's symmetry. A and B, by nature of the tie, by nature of the link, have to be connected to one another. So for example, that is, marriage is a good example of that one. In a lot of research that you'll see directed links. And directed links are important when you're talking about relationships that have asymmetry, That it's not necessarily the case that just because one node or individual does something, that the other node or individual will do that behavior as well. And there's three types of directed links. So the first is the instance where an A gives a present to B, but B gives nothing to A. And so when you see directed links, you're going to have arrows, and it'll show you, the direction of the relationship. So A is giving a present to B. In the second example, B is giving a present to A, but A gives nothing to B. And then in the last example, you see that A and B are giving presents to each other, denoted by the double arrows on the end. So those are nodes and links, and these are, again, the very basic building blocks of a graph and social networks. And speaking of building blocks, what's really, really important in network analysis is this triad. So a triad is three nodes, and they can be connected in a number of ways. This is an undirected triad. Okay, so I'm not giving you a direction of this relationship, but the triad, also called a sociogram, really is the building block of network analysis. And specifically, if you're talking about graphs and graph theory, the triad, from the basis of this triad, you can go on to do a lot of other really cool things. So graph theory, the triad is extremely important and is really seen as the building block of network analysis. You have graphs, but how we and how most statistical softwares use network data is representing the networks as a matrix. Okay, so I've given you a matrix, and this really is how, when you're getting your network data ready to be imported into your statistical software, you're going to manipulate most of the time a matrix. Okay, so this adjacency matrix is just the most basic matrix, and it shows who is next to whom. So I've given you 3 fictional individuals and given a matrix of their ties, right? Who knows who, or who is next to whom. 1 indicates the presence of a tie. So from the matrix, you can see that Carlo and Tammy are connected. And that's right, there's a 1, but John and Tammy are not connected, and so there's a 0. On the diagonal, I've just kind of left it blank, but some statistical programs will have you put a 1 there. Some will have you put a 0 there, but that's just, right, the diagonal is just, right, Tammy is obviously connected to Tammy, and John's obviously connected to John, and etc. So that is what is called, right, an adjacency matrix. So graphs, matrices, really important concepts in network analysis. Let's move now to a discussion of basic network statistics. And Carl, if I need to clarify anything or go back.
Allow me to ask one simple question about the direct link and direct link. That reminds me about the network model, or I'm sorry, the database model called ERM. So it's like an entity relationship model. So that direct link, the present, is to tie the 2 entities or 2 objects. So do we measure that present as something we can record like a variable?
Yeah, so this is just an example. I was thinking because, right, the holidays are here. Maybe you give a present to someone that might not give a present to you. But yeah, so this would be something that you'd have to get data on, right? Does A give a present to B? Does B give a present to A? And I'll talk in a little bit about, right, how to collect the network data. But that's a big challenge to, right, doing network analysis, is collecting this network data.
All right. Okay. I look for it. I will continue to stay tuned and listen on. Please go ahead. Interesting. Yeah.
So let's talk briefly on some basic network statistics. In the study of interdependence, remember, the focus on the relationship between 2 or more objects, requires not only a new set of concepts, but also a new set of statistical measures. And so I'm gonna introduce a few. Though there are, hundreds of network statistics, I'm going to talk about just a few, just some important ones. So the first network statistic that's really important is what's called the degree. And degree is a property of a node. So we're talking about, right, it's a property of a node. And the degree is just the number of links, the number of ties a node has. Okay, so this is just a descriptive statistic, but it's really helpful, and right, it can tell us some helpful information. So an example here would be the number of followers you have on Twitter. And I've given this diagram, and you can see that because A has 3 links, so A is linked to B, C, D, A has a degree of 3. So node A has a degree of 3. And if I'm asking about the degree of B, there's only 1 link from B to A. So the degree of B is 1. Similarly, the degree of C is 1. The degree of D is 1. So that's degree. And again, just a descriptive statistics, but can be very helpful when you're considering that I have probably 2 followers on Twitter, and Carl, I don't know if you're on Twitter, but you might have a lot more. We can say just from that descriptive statistic that you are more maybe influential than I am on Twitter. So when you're talking about degree, there's 2 types of degree: in degree and out degree. And this occurs only in directed networks. So you have to be able to draw the arrows between nodes. And in degree is the number of ties that a node receives. So I've given an example. So it's just the number of phone calls that I receive from others, or it could be the number of people that say I am their friend. Okay, so these are the ties that I am, as a node, as an individual, is receiving. Out degree is the number of ties that a node sends. So this would be the number of phone calls I make to others, or the number of people who I cite as my friends. Okay, so in degree and out degree are also really important network statistics, because you can say, I might have a large number and a large out degree, and say that, I have a lot of people that I consider to be my friends. But I might have a smaller in degree, right? So there might be less people, that consider me as their friend. So those are the 2, in degree and out degree are also really important. Again, just descriptive, but network statistics. Density is another really important network statistic. And this is a property of a network. Okay, so whereas degree was a property of a node, density, you're looking at a property of the entire network. And it's just the general level of linkage in the network. How many ties, essentially, total ties in the network. And you can actually calculate this. I've provided, a formula where you can see that the density is the number of actual connections. So the number of ties that actually exist divided by the total number of possible connections or ties in a network. So what are their actual connections or actual number of actual links divided by the total possible number of those connections. And so I've given you an example. So a graph with 5 lines and 5 nodes, I plug it into my formula, and it has a density of 0.5, which means that the graph or the network has 1/2 of all possible links. So to provide a description of density, I've included some pictures. These are both from James Fowler's 2011 article on causality in political networks. The graph, or the network on the left, it shows a relatively low density network. You can see that some nodes are connected to each other, but there are a lot of nodes that aren't connected to each other at all. And specifically, there's 3 what we call isolates at the top left-hand corner that aren't connected to anyone at all. And on the right, you see a network with relatively high density. You almost can't even make this picture out, because there's there's so many ties between nodes and the network. So that's an example of relatively low and relatively high density. But density is a property of network, and it can tell you, in a classroom, for example, looking at the density of ties among the classroom could tell you, how well, or to what extent that the kids or individuals in a classroom are knowing each other, getting along, whatever you're measuring, sharing, I don't know, lunch in the cafeteria. I'm not sure, but can tell you a lot of, this can be interesting information to know. Centrality is...
Interrupt, quick question, Lauren. Can I go back a couple of slides? Now, the denominator is the number of possible connections in a network. The network is a finite number, right? And I mean for example, you have a classroom maybe 40 students, and this would be a finite number. Imagine it's like a Twitter data. So that could be an infinite number. In that case, the denominator will be infinitely large. So that will be really difficult to calculate that density, where it's always close to zero, right?
Yeah, so you're bringing up a really a good question. So this network analysis and doing network analysis requires you to put a boundary on the network somehow.
Okay. Yeah.
And putting a boundary on the network is an empirical problem, right? But so in a classroom, like, that's contained. You can easily put a boundary on individuals in the classroom, right? So that's easy, and calculating something like density or any of these other measures is going to be easy. When you're looking at, so Twitter followers, you have to self-impose a boundary in order to make this work. Now, there are other statistics that can work with like boundaryless networks. But if in order to make this work, you're going to have to impose a boundary. So in the example of Twitter followers, you would just need to say, out of the 200,000 people of my followers,
you'd
have to impose that boundary. But that's right. Doing so brings up empirical and methodological challenges, and they're decisions that you as the researcher have to defend.
All right. I do know you're a KOL. You're becoming one now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question. So, okay, so I've talked about degree and density, and the last set of statistics I'm going to talk about are centrality. So centrality measures are a property of a node. So like degree, it's a property of a node. And it's a measure of prominence of one node or one individual in the network relative to other nodes in the network. And centrality, and I will talk about the specific measures of centrality, but this centrality measures specifically have really important socio-political significance. Having measures of centralities, right, creating measures, centrality measures, can tell you more about the access to information information and ideas, who has access to certain types of information, how network members interact. It can show you about the information flow, how information and ideas and resources flow through the network. It can tell you about visibility, right? Who are the most prominent nodes in the network, who has access to more information, and about the ability of the network to engage in collective action. And there's more reasons, but centrality measures really do have important socio-political significance. There are multiple measures of centrality. Degree is one of them, but I don't have time to talk about these specifically, but just so you're aware of them, there's degree centrality, there's closeness, there's betweenness, there's power, and there's many, many others, right? There's really a lot, there's multiple measures of centrality, and those are just a few, right, that you can be aware of as you learn more. You will come across those terms. So now, finally, let's move into actual network analysis. And the study of interdependence, again, not only requires a new set of concepts and a new set of statistical measures, but it's going to also require a new set of analytical tools. And again, once again, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here, but this is just an introduction, just skimming the surface of some of the tools of network analysis. But before you analyze network data, you have to gather network data. And this can be really challenging to do, because most often this data won't exist for you. It's not like the ANES or these big surveys that are run in other countries. Those are individual. Those surveys are concerned with individual level theories, the individual as a unit of analysis, and they won't have measures most of the time on relationships or network measures. And so it's going to require us to get our own network data. There are many ways that you can do this. A lot of network data can be gathered through interviews. So this is just, if you're interviewing someone, and I don't have an example off the top of my head, but you're asking them, who did you go to for social support, right? And you can get their answers. Well, I went to this organization and this organization and this organization, right? So you can get some network data from interviews. Surveys, this is a really common, a really common way to gather network data. And again, we could talk hours and hours and hours about how to do this. But in a survey, you could ask, for example, members of an organization, who they are connected to, how often they talk to those individuals. You can get a lot of information by survey. You can also gather network data using experiments, although this is particularly challenging because it's not often the case that you can randomly assign someone to be tied to another person. So there's a challenge with experimental collecting network data through experiments, but it can be done. And there's a lot of examples of really great, interesting work using experiments to gather network data. Archival analysis is also another way to gather network data. So an example of this would be John Patrick's work on the Medici, the family in Italy, and looking through the archives and pouring through archival data to show who the Medici family traded with, gave money with, to, married, using, again, first primary sources to gather network data. And there are there's other ways to gather network data as well. So again, before we do network analysis, we need to gather the network data. Doing this so can be tricky, and I think this is a reason why maybe some people shy away from network analysis, because it's just, again, it's data sometimes that you have to go out and get yourself, that doesn't exist already, that you have to put together. So it's going to require a little bit of additional work. Okay, so how do we analyze network data? And again, this is just, I'm just putting these terms up here for you, and we won't have an opportunity to talk about them. But there are multiple ways to analyze network data. You can use ordinary regression. This would look like if you had network data, and so maybe you could use your centrality measures, such as degree centrality, and you could throw degree centrality in as a control variable in your model, for example. So that's an example of that. There are network autocorrelation models that within kind of a normal, I would say, OLS framework account for the autocorrelation, the interdependence among observations. Those are, I've used those are helpful. You can use the quadratic assignment procedure, the exponential random graph model, which is called an ERGM. There's a ton more. There's also the TERGM, there's the TNAM, and on and on. And so really the type of model you use, just like with normal statistical analysis, is going to be determined by what questions you're trying to answer. Different models, if you want to say something about the structure of the network, if you have theories about how the structure of a network might matter, the ERGM model is going to be something that you might want to consider depending on your data. But if you're more interested in how individuals are affected by those networks, you want to look toward an autocorrelation model. That's going to be something that you use over an ERGM, for example. So there are some challenges, obviously, to this. The main challenge is having to account for the interdependence. And so this is obviously not possible with ordinary regression, because OLS assumes independence across observations. And with network data, you're breaking that independence assumption. You cannot assume independence, and you have to account for the interdependence. And so, that's why the normal OLS models break down and you can't use them. And this is also why I say so the autocorrelation models are helpful here, because they can take into account the relationship, that interdependence among observations. Missing data is also a huge problem in network data. If you consider, right, if you in a classroom of 12 and you don't have observations for 3 of the individuals, right, in that classroom of 12, you're missing a lot of data in the network because you can't fill in the columns, the rows in your matrix with, right, that information. Or similarly, if you're missing data information on a tie, right, you don't know if these 2 individuals are connected, that can be really problematic. And it impacts your estimation. So say you have a network data, again, of a classroom, and you only have, only 60% of the network data, you're not going to be able to make inferences about the entire influence network. You're only going to be able to make inference of the network that you have access to. So it limits your ability, your inference ability. Obviously, causality this is a huge problem. This is the bane of my existence with network research. Are networks the cause or an effect of behavior? So you have to deal with this big thorny homophily problem. And homophily is the idea that birds of a feather flock together, right? That like begets like. If 2 people are connected, then they are more likely to share common characteristics. But you don't know if they share common characteristics because they are in a network together, or those common characteristics cause them to, right, become friends, be in the network. And so separating, right, the chicken and the egg here is really tricky, a really tricky problem. Similarly, we also know that nodes are more likely to be connected to one another if they are geographically proximate to each other. And so you also have to consider the structural factors that push or pull people away from each other. That can be, right, a thorny problem for inference as well. And this, inference and causality really must be taken seriously. And many reviewers in the review process are, right, do push back against network data, network analysis, and our ability to say anything causal at all, just due to the nature of the data. So those are some, again, challenges to be aware of as you're pursuing this research. There's a lot of programs for, statistical software programs for analyzing the network data. I've listed some of the popular ones. So UCINet and PIAC are popular programs for analyzing and also visualizing network data, I should say, visualizing. I use R, and I think, Carl, you do too, but I've found that it's, obviously, R is free. I think UCINet you might have to pay for. I'm not sure about PIAC, but R is free. And it's relatively, I think, easy to work with network data in R, and visualization-wise, R does a really good job. You can make really cool visualizations in R, so that's what I would recommend. Again, there are other programs for analyzing and visualizing network data, but these are of the most, I think, common, specifically in, right, the social sciences, and again, I would recommend using R. So here are a few examples of just network analysis and research on network analysis before we conclude. This is a network of 9/11 hijackers. So the nodes in the network, or the circles, right? The nodes are individuals, the individual hijackers themselves. And each node is bigger. The bigger the node, so the bigger the circle, the more connections they have to other individuals in the network. Okay, so you see, like, the most central and most prominent individuals in the network have bigger nodes, right? So this, there's been a lot of work on this in the aftermath of 9/11, showing the networks of the 9/11 hijackers and how ties of family and kinship, right, really, account for a lot of the relationships and the ties between individuals involved in the 9/11 attacks.
Sorry, can I go back? What's the color indicating?
So I
Colors?
am not remembering what the color indicates. So yeah, so I could follow probably the link and learn more, but I don't remember what the color indicates.
Mm-hmm. But the links are the relationship, right? The
Oh,
friends, if they're friends. Yeah.
yeah, and so yeah, so this graph also shows you, this network also shows you that with network visualization, you can,
Mm-hmm.
you know, again, increase the size of the node based
Uh-huh.
on a network statistic or a network measure
Mm-hmm.
to show their prominence. And you can also
Mm-hmm.
color their node to indicate, whether they're from the same family or the same
Uh-huh.
country or,
Mm-hmm.
same political party.
Mm-hmm.
So there's really a lot of things that you can do there. Another example, and this is pretty popular one in American politics, is co-sponsorship networks.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, again, this is from Fowler Connecting the Congress. He looks at the top 20 most connected legislators in
Mm-hmm.
the 106th House, the 108th House of Representatives, and then the least connected legislators in the House. And so you can see in the top 20, there's a lot more ties among nodes in the top 20, and the ties are valued. So some ties are bolder than the others, and that's going to, and you can also write bold or color a tie
Mm-hmm.
to indicate, something else about your data. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so this just indicates that they're valued by the number of bills they co-sponsor with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Co-sponsorship is the tie, and then it's bolded or depending on how much they're co-sponsoring with one another.
Mm-hmm.
So this is interesting, co-sponsoring of legislation. Interesting. This is something that is you can actually play around with on, it's called Hoaxy.
Mm-hmm.
And it tracks the spread of information and sometimes misinformation in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a search for this is looking at the spread of a Breitbart article about people, individuals in the US that don't believe in the outcome of the 2020 presidential election was legitimate. And you can
Mm-hmm.
track the spread of like which Twitter accounts are spreading this article. And
Mm-hmm.
you can see that the nodes they're bigger if they are sharing the article more often, and they're colored. The nodes are colored by whether they exhibit bot-like, right? If they might be suspected to be a bot and not a real human. So the red nodes are the Twitter accounts that look to be more like bot accounts, and the blue ones are ones that inhibit the most human-like behavior. So these are just, again, 3 examples, very quick examples of how you can visualize network data, but also the types of different types of network data that are out there that you can analyze and select. And so now I will open and leave. I know we don't have too much longer, but we can spend time for questions. And I also should say that here's some resources that I found helpful in my own study of this. So yeah, questions.
Yes, very interesting, Lauren. Thank you very much. And it's really eye-opening. And now I learned from Lauren a few years ago some simple social network analysis models and then analyses. Now she's basically giving us a whole new world of seeing data, particularly the network data. Now, I want to ask, for example, can we see some applications analyzing social media data, like Facebook or Twitter and
yeah. So let's see, I can, if you would like to see this Hoaxy website,
Yeah.
I can show you. Let me get it up and then I will share my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will reshare.
Yeah.
Okay, so you should be able to see this. But so this is
Yeah. Oh.
this is a way to visualize the spread of certain claims and also fact checking. And so you can see that they have some recent popular claims, misinformation. And so I'm going to just click on open secrets, and then you just search, and it'll take a while. But what it does is it tracks the spread of a particular article or claim over time. And so again, it takes a little bit of time, but it'll show you across like multiple days how the network changes as the article is spread over and over. So again, give it just a second.
Yeah. So this is to indicate the hoax or the fake news using the network structure, like looking into how they are forwarded, how they are connected, right?
Yeah, so this just shows you, so you can see it.
Wow.
Yeah, so you're seeing, so who is sharing?
Look for the red color, right? Look, red are the bots, right?
Yeah. And so this is like also across time. So, we went from, wow, so this was from like, 2017 to 2018 and how that network changed over time. And you can click, this is really cool. Like you can click on, okay, so this Twitter account is called Politica Sarah and is sharing the article a lot. And you can see that there's like this kind of click here where this Twitter account, Politica Sarah, is the is the central node there. But you can see that how it's gotten to others in the network.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can look at accounts and tweets, and so that's an example. There's a lot of this work happening out there. So basically, what this is showing is, and I use this in my fake news. My fake news class, because it just shows how fast and how far misinformation can spread on social media.
Wow.
And misinformation often spreads faster and further than true information. But so there's a lot of, when just looking at the spread of misinformation on the internet, there's a lot of applications here. So that's an example. Although there's a ton of people working with Twitter data, mostly Twitter data because Facebook data is harder to get, working with Twitter data. But this is just, an example.
All right. Go back to a very basic question. So now that in the network data or the SNA, we've been traditionally thinking the unit of analysis. What is a unit analysis? But in the SNA, is this the individual node being the unit of analysis, or it could be just a network, or it could be a link to be individual the unit we will study?
Yeah, so the unit of analysis and network analysis is the relationship. Yeah, so and I guess I can also put this up.
It makes more sense, because when I talked earlier, I talked about the ERM in database. So we're not just looking at individual objects, but also look at the relationship, which is to link the relationship that links individual objects, and it could be multiple there. So that be the unit of analysis too. Yeah.
So it's the relationship, but the dyad between two nodes, or multiple the nodes in the network. Yeah, so it's definitely different. Obviously, that's completely different from everything you learn in your introduction to statistical classes, where it's individual.
This is why we are entering a whole new world. Thank you for leading us the journey. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Really interesting, extremely interesting. Now I think Can you briefly talk about history? Maybe it's only a few, not too long ago, right? This new method introduced, particularly in terms of methods and tools for us to use it.
Yeah, so I will talk about like the history more in like this in sociology and political science, because that's what I'm most familiar with, because this has existed, before, and math and social science have just brought it over. But the work of Lazarsfeld, and I know Carl, right? You are, Lazarsfeld, in looking at ties between individuals, and specifically in key presidential races in 1940s and 1950s, kind of really introduced this, I guess, the social aspect of voting, and particularly to the social science audience. And so, Lazarsfeld was extremely influential in this. And you have some work, again, by Burt in the 1970s and 1980s. However, after Lazarsfeld, right, we really turn away from like this kind of relational thinking, and specifically, and I'm just right in American politics, it's the explosion of the American voter, right, in the ANES, and this really turn away from this relational thinking. And so it's not until Huckfeld and Sprague and their work in the 1990s, and really 2000s, and specifically with like the advent of the internet, and specifically social media, that it just exploded. But Huckfeld and Sprague are really credited with bringing it back into the mainstream of political science. So yeah, but that's a little bit about the history.
Recently, the tools are available. Make it easier to visualize and also to analyze.
Exactly.
In R, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Now, I think you are teaching a whole full course next semester, and I'm sure you will give more detail. Can you talk briefly about what we can learn from your course and a full semester course?
Yeah, so it essentially aims to introduce this concept of interdependence, and not only just the concept, but why it necessitates, again, like we said, new concepts and new measures and new tools and analytical tools. And so essentially, the course is a snapshot, essentially, or this presentation was a snapshot of the course.
Yes.
Everything that we talked about in the in the presentation, we'll spend a lot more time going into the detail and the nitty gritty, or like the math behind all of these things. And then finally, we'll talk about specific applications in public health, in sociology, and political science, and criminology, etc. We'll do some of that, but it is, again, this presentation is just a snapshot of.
Yes. Maybe we should advertise for that course. And you are really,
I would appreciate
I'm really interested myself.
Yeah.
If you're interested, please check into Professor Santoro's course at UT Dallas. And do you remember what is the course number, Lauren? Is it under PSCI or it's under EPPS?
I think that it's under PSCI, and it's
PSCI.
listed as a special topics course.
Okay. It'll be a 7,000 course, right?
Yeah. So let me just, I'm pulling it up.
Okay. And we will
so 7381
viewers for this video, if you are interested, check into Professor Santoro's course, and to be delivered spring 2021, and it will be a special topic course, but the title of the course is a social network analysis. Professor Santoro will give a more detail for you to teaching you how to manage the data, collect data, manage data, and visualize the data. That's the most exciting part, and put it in your hands-on, and hands-on creating these models. And I really wish I can take that course too, and if it's not at the same time as my course. All right, I think this is about an hour, and now this is really exciting. And Professor Santoro, I think, can you provide materials, measures, and links so we can put it on your on a GitHub or the Data Analytics Colloquium? We have a special repository for this professor, so we can put the materials in GitHub. If you search GitHub, it'll be DA Colloquium, DACOLLOQUIUM, and also it'll be available on the website too. It's the same at DACOLLOQUIUM.com, data analytics colloquium.com. All right, thank you very much, Lauren. I really appreciate it, and we look forward to inviting you back to give a more detailed hands-on workshop, probably next semester, maybe next year. All right.
Yeah, well, I look forward to it, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to introduce social network analysis. Thanks, Carl.
Pleasure's all ours. Thank you very much, Lauren.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.